The crackle of the fireplace filled the living room, its gentle pops and hisses spreading an almost serene warmth throughout the space. The orange glow danced across the walls, flickering shadows creeping along the edges of the room like silent spectators. I sat in the worn leather armchair, sinking into its familiar embrace, my gaze fixed on the flames as they writhed and twisted behind the iron grate. On any other night, the fire might have been comforting, a simple pleasure to ease the weight of the day, but tonight it served a far darker purpose. I leaned back slowly, lifting the glass of whiskey to my lips. The bottle had been gathering dust on the shelf for years, waiting for some celebratory occasion that never came. The drink burned as it slid down my throat, leaving a trail of heat that spread through my chest. But the whiskey's sting was nothing compared to the searing betrayal that had taken root inside me. It festered there, raw and unrelenting, gnawing at the edges of my composure. Emily had always been the love of my life, or so I believed. We had been married for 7 years, and during that time, I had built my world around her. She was captivating, the kind of woman who could effortlessly command attention in any room she entered. Her laughter was infectious, her ambition unmatched. I admired her, cherished her, and carried the quiet pride of a man who considered himself lucky to have her by his side. That pride, however, had turned to ash 3 days ago. It felt like a lifetime now, but the memory of that moment was still fresh, playing on an endless loop in my mind. I hadn't been searching for anything incriminating. In fact, I had been looking for nothing at all, simply passing by her desk when I noticed her laptop left open in the rush of her departure. She had been packing for a business trip, hurried and distracted. A faint glow from the screen caught my eye, and with little more than idle curiosity, I leaned over to glance at what she had been working on. The messages were the first thing I saw, a long, intimate string of text that left no room for misinterpretation. I stared at the screen, frozen, as the realization settled in like a weight pressing down on my chest. They weren't work-related. There was nothing professional about the way she spoke to someone named Greg. No ambiguity in the hotel reservation attached at the bottom of the exchange. The explicit details of their plans unraveled before me, line by line. Worse than the affair itself was the way she spoke about me, a footnote in her life, a boring, reliable safety net, the man she came home to when there was nowhere else to be. My heart sank, the floor beneath me seeming to drop away entirely. I wanted to slam the laptop shut, to pretend I had never seen it, but the words were etched into me now, carved deep enough that even closing my eyes brought them back with startling clarity. I could have confronted her then. I had every reason to, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was something colder. The quiet realization that confronting her in the heat of the moment would do nothing but invite more lies. She would deny it, twist the truth, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. Instead, I let it simmer. I let the storm inside me gather strength, waiting for the right moment to unleash it. Emily returned tonight. The front door creaked open, and there she stood, suitcase in hand, her smile radiant as ever. She looked at me with the same affectionate eyes I once believed were only for me. "Hey, babe, I missed you," she called out, her voice carrying that familiar warmth as she kicked off her heels by the door. Her tone was so sweet, so carefully crafted, that for a fleeting second, I almost believed her. Almost. I remained seated in the armchair, watching her over the rim of my glass as I took another slow sip of whiskey. The fire crackled louder, as if echoing the tension that filled the room. "Did you have a good trip?" I asked, keeping my voice measured and calm. She hesitated. It was brief, but I saw it, the flicker of doubt that crossed her face before she nodded. "Yeah, it was productive. Exhausting, though," she replied with practiced ease, already making her way toward the kitchen. She expected me to follow, to take her bags as I always did, but tonight was different. I stayed rooted to the chair, the weight of my silence enough to keep her glancing back at me. Her eyes narrowed slightly, curiosity bleeding into concern. "You okay?" she asked, her tone light, but laced with underlying tension. "Perfectly fine," I said, letting the words hang between us, heavy and deliberate. The calmness seemed to unsettle her. She shifted, lingering for a moment as if considering whether to press further. But ultimately, she shrugged it off and continued unpacking, filling the kitchen with the rustle of bags and the soft hum of her voice as she recounted her trip. I watched her closely, listening to every word, but only half hearing. The storm inside me had yet to break. Her days were a whirlwind of busy meetings and a hectic schedule, every moment accounted for, every hour filled. But beneath the surface of her composed exterior, lies flowed effortlessly, each one a dagger twisting deeper into my gut. It was as if she was weaving a tapestry of deceit with threads as sharp as they were delicate. Finally, in the midst of our strained evening, she paused, her nose crinkling slightly. "What's burning in the fireplace?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of curiosity. "It smells different." I shifted forward in the armchair, my elbows resting on my knees as I gestured towards a hearth. "Why don't you take a look?" I suggested, my tone measured, hiding the storm within. Her brow furrowed in confusion as she crossed the room, her footsteps hesitant, echoing softly against the wooden floor. The moment her gaze fell upon the hearth, her face blanched, the color draining as if washed away by a tidal wave of shock. "What the hell is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible over the crackling fire. The flames were a ravenous beast, devouring the remnants of what once was our wedding album. The photos curled and blackened, each image a memory being consumed by the hungry blaze. Alongside them lay a box of keepsakes, our love letters, anniversary cards, and even the dried flowers from our wedding day. They were next in line, sacrifices to the fire that mirrored the ashes of our relationship. "It seemed fitting," I said, my voice cold and steady, devoid of the warmth it once held. "These things don't mean much anymore, do they?" She turned to me, her eyes wide, a mix of panic and anger swirling within them. "What are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" Her voice was a plea wrapped in disbelief. "Am I?" I stood, setting my glass down on the coffee table with deliberate precision, the sound echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. "No, Emily, for the first time in days, I'm thinking very clearly." She took a step back, retreating from the severity in my eyes, the firelight casting eerie shadows across her face, accentuating her distress. "I don't understand." I pulled my phone from my pocket, the device suddenly heavy with the weight of truth. I opened the photos I had taken of her laptop screen, images that had burned themselves into my mind as surely as the fire consumed our memories. Holding the phone up, I watched as recognition dawned in her eyes, her face paling even further. "Care to explain who Greg is?" I asked, my voice a whip crack in the silence. Her mouth opened and closed, words eluding her like a fish gasping for air. It's not what it looks like," she stammered, desperation threading through her voice. "Really?" I said, raising an eyebrow, my skepticism palpable. "Because it looks like you've been screwing him behind my back for God knows how long." "It was a mistake," she blurted out, her voice breaking. "I was lonely and you've been so distant lately." I laughed, a bitter sound that felt alien, even to me. "Distant? I've been working my ass off to build a life for us, to give you everything you wanted. But I guess that wasn't enough for you, was it?" Her eyes filled with tears, sparkling in the firelight. But my heart was unmoved, hardened by betrayal. "Please, we can fix this." "It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice rising, echoing the disbelief that coursed through me. "You planned an entire trip around him. You called me boring. You lied to my face." Every word was a nail in the coffin of our love, a testament to the irreparable chasm that had opened between us. The fire crackled on, indifferent, as the remnants of what once was turned to ash. The room was thick with tension as she stood before me, tears streaming down her face. Don't insult my intelligence by saying it didn't mean anything, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I refused to let her tears sway me. I thought about confronting you when I first found out, I continued, pacing the room. But then I realized you don't deserve that courtesy. You deserve to feel what it's like to have your world ripped apart. Her head snapped up, confusion and fear mingling in her eyes. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. I walked over to the mantel and picked up an envelope. I spoke to a lawyer. Divorce papers are already drafted. You'll find copies of the evidence attached, I said, my tone cold and unwavering. I've also contacted Greg's wife. She was very interested in knowing what her husband has been up to. Her face twisted in horror. You didn't, she whispered. Oh, I did, I replied. She's probably confronting him right about now. I tossed the envelope onto the coffee table. Take a good look. You'll find it's more than fair. I'm not interested in revenge beyond this. I just want you out of my life. She sank to the floor, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. Please don't do this. I love you, she begged. You don't love me, I said, my voice icy. You love the comfort I provide and the stability. But you threw away the one thing I needed from you, loyalty. She continued to plead, but I'd heard enough. I grabbed my coat and keys. You have until the end of the week to move out, I said, heading for the door. If you're not gone by then, I'll have the locks changed. Where are you going? She cried as I paused with my hand on the doorknob. Anywhere but here, I replied, stepping out into the cool night air, feeling the weight of betrayal begin to lift with every step I took away from her. In the weeks that followed, I filed for divorce and began the process of rebuilding my life. The sympathy from friends and family was overwhelming, but I didn't dwell on their pity. Instead, I focused on rediscovering the hobbies and passions I'd set aside during my marriage. Emily moved out quietly, her pleas for reconciliation dwindling as she realized I wasn't coming back. Greg's wife left him, and last I heard, he was struggling to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. Good riddance. The fireplace has remained in use since that night. I keep it as a reminder, not of the pain, but of the strength it took to walk away. Betrayal may have burned my past to ashes, but from those ashes, I've begun to rise anew.